Morning, all. I can say that it's my first video today. I want to talk about the Washington Capitals while we're in between the first period and the second period of Game 4 between the New York Islanders and the Carolina Hurricanes. And for the Washington Capitals, normally they're in the playoffs. Normally I wouldn't be talking about them right now other than talking about a playoff series that they're in, the games that they're involved in, and all that. And so this is an odd playoffs. We don't have Crosby. We don't have Ovechkin. That's a first. I'm sure the NHL probably looking at that from a marketing perspective and saying, well, that kind of stinks. There are other superstar players you can market, but the Crosby Ovechkin comparisons are always there. And so it's interesting that both of them missed the playoffs in the first or in the same year. This is the first time they've missed the playoffs since 2014. And so this is the first time in the existence of this channel they've missed the playoffs. It was something people have been predicting for, I want to say, like 3 years now. People have been predicting them falling out. It finally happens. It's their first sub 500 record since 2006, 2007. So that really generally doesn't happen. Ovechkin down the stretch seemed very, very frustrated with things, and it's understandable. When he came back to the team after leaving due to the passing of his father, while he was away, basically they fell out of that chase. The sell takes place. And so the question becomes then one of, so are they going to rearm and go for it again? I think they're going to try. I do. I think they're going to try. So 2018, they won the Stanley Cup. 2019, they lost in the first round against Carolina, and that started a pattern. They would lose in the first round the next 3 years as well. 2020 against the Islanders, 2021 against Boston, and last year against Florida. After the loss against Florida, they jettisoned both of their restricted free agent goaltenders in Vitek Vanacek and in Samsonov as well. And then they went out and got Kemper. And honestly, Kemper played well. So it's not a matter of the goaltending not living up to its expectations. So I want to take a look at three key players here. Ovechkin, 45 games in 2020-2021, 24 goals, 18 assists, 42 points. Very reliable from a goal scorer's perspective, of course. Last year in 77 games, 50 goals, 40 assists, 90 points. And this year in 73 games, 42 goals, 33 assists, 75 points. It is remarkable. He has 42 goals, and yet it feels like he slowed down at the end of the season. Otherwise, he probably would have had 50 again. So for Ovechkin, he is definitely within range of Wayne Gretzky. Probably doesn't reach that record next year unless he has a fantastic year. But he is within, shouting distance of that record within the next, I'll say, year and a half. Year and a half, he probably gets there. Then you've got Dylan Strome, who was picked up from Chicago. 2020-2021 with the Hawks. In 40 games, he had 9 goals, 8 assists, 17 points. And then last year with Chicago, 69 games, 22 goals, 26 assists, 48 points. I was very surprised Chicago didn't keep him around. With Washington, in 81 games, 23 goals, 42 assists for 65 points. Strome stepped into the position normally occupied by Backstrom, and I thought he did well. And apparently the team did too, because they rewarded him with an extension. Kuznetsov, 2020-2021, 41 games, 9 goals, 20 assists, 29 points. There was a lot of criticism of him that season, so he bounced back the following year. 79 games, 24 goals, 54 assists for 78 points. But this year's totals have dropped off again. In 81 games, 12 goals, 43 assists, 55 points. So the discussions of whether or not he wants to be traded, they were coming up after the trade deadline and passed and whatnot. He basically at the time said, it's just kind of noise, and I'm not addressing that right now. We're still in the hunt for a playoff spot. But it wasn't exactly a denial. Like, it wasn't the kind of vehement denial you would like to see from a pillar of your organization. And so we'll see if he sticks around this summer. It's possible that with or without a trade request, that the Caps would put him on the market this summer anyways. But that contract is going to be very difficult to trade. So looking at players who missed a lot of time and are veterans, you have Oshie, who played 58 games, 19 goals, 16 assists, 35 points. Oshie can still be an excellent top six forward, but he does miss time. And so on the Capitals, a team that this year just didn't seem to have that depth that they need to absorb these losses, they really stood out. John Carlson, 40 games, 9 goals, 20 assists, 29 points. When he was in the lineup, he was very good, but again, missed half the season. Backstrom played 39 games, 7 goals, 14 assists, 21 points. Backstrom's a fascinating one to me because he's signed for 2 more years, and I don't know if he's going to play those full 2 years. I don't know if, with him returning from hip surgery, what we're going to see this coming season. Now, I know he had the 21 points in 39 games after returning from that hip surgery this year, but those aren't the kind of totals we're used to from him, and I don't know if he's going to bounce back. And then you have Tom Wilson. When he was in the lineup, he was very good. 33 games, 13 goals, 9 assists, 22 points. If Wilson plays the whole season, it would have been a better season for Washington. They're probably still not a playoff team, but Wilson, when he keeps his nose clean and he's not crossing that line, I think he's one of the best power forwards in the game. So what they did at the deadline was they sold, and it was a smart move. It was the right move to make, and it definitely led to them ending up below 500. If they'd kept everybody, it's possible they finish above 500. So they traded Lars Eller to Colorado for a 2025 second-round pick. Eller's done well in Colorado. I don't think he's done so well that the Caps are regretting their move. Gustafsson was traded to Toronto along with a 2023 first, which they had previously acquired, and we will talk about in a minute. But they acquired Rasmus Sandin. Sandin was kind of spinning his wheels in Toronto. It was clear that whether it was Sheldon Keefe, whether it was Kyle Dubas, whoever in the organization had kind of soured on the idea of him being a top guy, he wasn't going to get there in Toronto. And in Washington, his numbers were quite good. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes this season. They paid a good price. I mean, a 2023 first, even though it's Boston, so it's not going to be an early first, that could potentially be a decent player for the Leafs down the road. Then they traded Johansson as well to Minnesota for a 2024 third-round pick. Minnesota's quite happy with that deal. I think for the Caps they are as well. Johansson has played better with Minnesota than he did with Washington. So again, I think that was a good deal for both sides. And they traded Orlov and Hathaway to Boston, a very, very much looked over deal. And it was for that 2023 first they would then trade for Sandin. So this trade essentially becomes Orlov and Hathaway to Boston for a pick that becomes Sandin, a 2024 third, a 2025 second, and then because Minnesota were the brokers in all this, they also got Svetlakov from Minnesota in all of these machinations of a three-way deal, as is the case at trade deadlines now because of the flat cap. So I think, honestly, Washington did pretty well for themselves. And I know that looking at Orlov and how he's played in Boston might make it look really bad for Washington, but I don't know that they could afford to keep everything the same, and it might have been foolhardy to do so. I think Sandin being acquired was a smart move, and moving Orlov to make that happen, I think it made a lot of sense. So their UFAs this summer, Craig Smith, Sherry, Irwin, Connor Brown, who only played a handful of games. So unfortunately, Washington fans never really got to see just how good Connor Brown can be, as well as Carl Hagelin. And so in the cases of Brown and Hagelin, we'll see if Hagelin ends up playing next season. We'll see if he decides to re-sign in Washington. I'd be very surprised if Connor Brown ends up coming back to Washington, but they do have a little bit of cap space. Now, that's going to get eaten up. Alexiev and Fehervari are restricted free agents. Fehervari, a very good defensive defenseman. He's going to get paid. It's going to eat into that $8,158,333,000 in cap space they have for next season, according to Cap Friendly. Now, according to management at the time of the trade deadline, they were looking to get a top six winger this summer. At least that's the rumor that's out there, that they're looking for a top six winger this summer, which I don't think that's any kind of a surprise. And so this team wants to jump back into a playoff spot. And right now, too, they have a 6% chance of drafting Connor Bedard. So we're now getting to the teams that have a decent chance maybe at getting Bedard. For Detroit, who I talked about yesterday, it's a 5% chance. Now we're up to 6. That number's going to keep going up in these videos as the series goes along. But for them to have the money to go out and get a top 6 right winger or left winger, whichever wing they decide to go for, they may have to move a contract. And that's where things get interesting, because you have Backstrom, $9.2 million till 2025. Kuznetsov, $7.8 million till 2025. Oshie, $5.75 million till 2025. Mantha, $5.7 million till 2024. Wilson, $5.16 million till 2024. I'm just saying flat out, Wilson's not on, there's no way Wilson goes anywhere. But starting this summer, they have a chance to extend with Wilson, and I would think the earlier they have those discussions, the better. Carlson, $8 million until 2026. And Kemper, $5.25 million till 2027. That contract looks fantastic at this point, because Kemper had a very good season for them, and gave them the kind of goaltending that they were looking for this year. So for Washington, I do think they're in a position to jump back into the playoffs next year, but I think they're going to have to look to move somebody, or they're going to have to look at a buyout. So when you're looking at buyouts, for instance, maybe Mantha is the one that makes the most sense to buy out. If you're not happy with his direction, there's only a year left on that contract, so if you buy it out, you have a penalty for 2 years, but it would provide them with the flexibility, and they've said they are going to have flexibility this summer. So this year, they don't have any extra picks. In fact, they just have their own picks, except for their 3rd and 6th that were traded away. They have no 2nd in 2024, but they have 3 3rds that year. They have 3 2nds in 2025. So they've acquired some extra draft picks, but not this year. That may change once we get to the draft table. Maybe they move a player for a draft pick. Maybe they move future picks for current picks. But for right now, the future is kind of in flux. This is a team that needs new superstar players coming in, young forwards coming in. Connor McMichael, there was a hope that maybe he would evolve into that. Maybe it's Hendrix Lapierre who eventually comes in and is able to do that. There are other prospects available to this team as well, but it remains to be seen on where the future trajectory goes. Do they get worse, or can they bounce back and get into the playoffs? I think as long as Ovechkin's here, it's very similar to Crosby, Malkin, Letang in Pittsburgh. They wouldn't be interested in a full-on rebuild, so you have to go out and do your best to get them a roster that's going to put them back in the playoffs. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.